My breath trembled too close to my lips, shallow and uneven, as if afraid to fully enter my lungs. The silence pressed against me like the flat edge of a cold blade, and my heartbeat thudded louder than the waves gnawing at the shore. Fog coiled thick around the coastline, swallowing torches, softening faces, turning the gathered nobles into silhouettes with sharp, watching eyes. Their stares burned against my skin, judgmental, expectant, hungry, and inevitability tightened around my ribs, like a rope pulled by unseen hands. The sea was waiting, and tonight it wanted blood. The blood tide ceremony was older than our histories, older than the kingdom's crumbling cliffs and salt-soaked stones. Each year, the nobles paraded their silk-draped cruelty before the ocean spirits, offering whatever sacrifice would keep the storms from tearing our homes apart. I stood among them, though no one truly saw me, a shadow in the margins, a tidewell by name only. My family had abandoned me long ago to a corner of the lineage they preferred to forget. I was tolerated, not wanted, a formality, a reminder that even the discarded must kneel. Salt and smoke saturated the air. Torches hissed where the fog licked at their flames. Silks whispered as nobles shifted restlessly, impatient for spectacle. I kept my gaze lowered, fingers laced tightly to hide their trembling. The ocean had always terrified me, its endless hunger, its voice in dreams. But tonight, the fear crawled under my skin, intimate and wrong. Something in the tide was watching me. The high priest lifted his storm-blackened driftwood staff. His chant rolled over the waves, a rasping string of syllables that tasted of iron. The nobles echoed dutifully, hollow and theatrical. I mouthed nothing. My silence was the only rebellion I had left. And then the sea answered. Shapes rose from the fog, wraiths made of water and shadow, their faces shifting like reflections shattered in disturbed pools. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale as moonlight drowned beneath waves. Their voices were the sound of drowning. Gasps cut the air. Nobles stumbled back, clutching torches as shields. My body locked in place, breath caught like a trapped bird in my throat. The wraiths drifted closer, dissolving and reforming with every breath of wind. The tide surged, tugging at my ankles as if it knew me, pulling me toward its open jaws. Then panic erupted. Silks tore. Torches fell hissing into the surf. Someone cried out. Someone else ran. The priest shouted for order, but the wraith's keening swallowed his command. The fog thickened, crawling around legs and hems, dragging everything toward the water. I stumbled back, but the tide dragged harder. And then he appeared. A body collapsed onto the sand before me, thrown by the sea like an offering, storm-soaked, bleeding. His presence heavy enough to make the air bend. His hair clung to his face, dark with salt water. His clothes looked torn by claws of wind and wave. He was no noble, no priest, no mortal thing the sea should have released. Something in me stilled, something in me knew. He groaned, trying to rise, his hand clawing weakly into the sand as though he fought against an unseen force. His breath shuddered out of him, raw and broken. I should have run. I should have followed the others, but I couldn't move. The world narrowed to the fragile rise and fall of his chest. Without thinking, I reached for him. The moment my fingers brushed his skin, the world shattered. The tide froze mid-crash, water suspended in impossible stillness. Every wraith halted, their forms flickering like dying lanterns. The priest's staff ignited with runes of cold, white light, and something on my own skin answered, glowing beneath my sleeve, runes, lines, symbols I had never seen before. Whispers rose from the fog. Layered voices, old as the sea, speaking in tongues that vibrated through bone. Cold burned along my palm. His skin was freezing, yet it seared me like flame. My heart tripped, faltered, then steadied to a rhythm that wasn't mine. A rhythm that matched his. His eyes opened, storm grey, violent, threaded with lightning that crackled faintly, impossibly. His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, the entire world leaned toward him, as though the ocean itself bowed to his presence. Recognition surged through me, sharp and inexplicable. I knew him, not his name, not his story, but something bound us, something older than blood. The whispers coiled tighter around us. The wraiths recoiled into mist. The noble's screams vanished. Only him. Only his breath brushing my cheek. Salt, storm, heat, and my body trembling under something I couldn't name. I tried to speak. Nothing came. My voice drowned in the weight of whatever bound us. He moved, a faint twitch of his lips, a deeper breath, a shift of his fingers still tangled in mine. His gaze didn't waver. It pressed into me, steady and unyielding, as if he searched my soul for a memory I didn't possess. And then, in a voice raw and cracked from the sea, he spoke. He spoke my name, though I had never given it, and in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The fog still clung to my skin when they tore me from the shore. Hands, rough, cold, and trembling with superstition, dragged me across wet sand while the noble's torches vanished behind us like frightened sparks swallowed by mist. My feet stumbled, my breath breaking in sharp bursts, but the sea's pull was stronger than any grip. The storm-soaked stranger, the man whose eyes had frozen the tide, was carried beside me by shadows that weren't human hands. I didn't resist. I couldn't. The ocean had already claimed its due. A ship materialized out of the fog, like something summoned, not built. Its hull rose black and scarred, as if storms had bitten pieces from it and spat them back in anger. Lanterns burned low along the railing, their sickly green glow devoured by the mist. The sails hung heavy, slick with seawater and something darker. The crew waited on deck, pale and silent, every gaze sharpening the moment it fell on me. I was pushed up the gangplank. The boards creaked beneath my weight, slick with spray, the scent of salt thick enough to taste. Every step felt like walking deeper into a fate I didn't choose. When I reached the deck, the crew parted, slowly, reluctantly, murmuring behind gloved hands. Their eyes darted between me and the man they carried. He lay on the planks, chest rising faintly, storm-colored eyes half closed. Something inside me tightened. I didn't know him, yet I couldn't look away. "She touched him," one sailor whispered. "Marked," another breathed, voice shaking. Their fear wasn't for him, it was for me. He stirred before I could speak, his voice rough as a wave breaking against stone. "Bring her below." The command sliced through the fog. My heart stuttered. Hands grabbed my arms, dragging me below deck. The air narrowed into a dark, damp corridor. Lanterns flickered against runes carved into the walls, symbols that pulsed faintly, as though matching the rhythm of my racing pulse. Salt and iron filled the air, sharp enough to sting. They threw me into a small cabin. The door slammed shut. My breath shook in my chest. Moments later, it opened again, and he stepped inside. He filled the doorway, tall despite the injuries that streaked his coat with dark water and blood. His hair clung to his face, dripping trails down the sharp lines of his jaw. Lantern light flickered across him, catching scars I couldn't decipher and shadows that didn't belong to the room. His presence wasn't loud, it was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. He stayed near the door, as though even proximity was dangerous. I swallowed, voice barely steady. "Who are you?" Silence stretched. His breath was unsteady, just slightly, but enough to make something inside me twist. Finally, he spoke. The words deliberate and controlled. "Captain Cale Rathmore." My blood went cold. Rathmore, the cursed captain, the immortal commander of the drowned fleet, spoken of only in taverns or whispered, by sailors who feared storms even under clear skies. I had thought him nothing more than a myth, used to frighten children from wandering too near the cliffs. Yet here he was, breathing, watching me. "You should not be here," he said, voice tight, almost strained. "I didn't choose this," I whispered. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The tide chose you because you touched me." The words wrapped around my ribs like chains. I wanted to deny it, to blame panic, instinct, anything but destiny. But the memory of runes glowing beneath my skin silenced every lie. Something ancient had awakened, something the sea recognized. He shifted, a subtle movement, as though to step toward me, but stopped. His jaw tightened. His hand twitched at his side, fingers trembling once before he forced them still. His gaze met mine briefly, then flicked away, as if looking at me pulled at something he couldn't afford to feel. The creaking ship and distant roar of waves filled the tense space between us. My breath tangled in my throat when he finally moved, slow, deliberate, crossing the room. He stopped only a breath away from me. I could feel the heat radiating from him despite the chill clinging to his clothes. Salt brushed against my cheek with each exhale he forced through parted lips. His hand lifted, slow enough that I felt the air shift before his fingers hovered inches from mine. He trembled, just barely, but I felt it. My heart thundered, trapped between fear and a pull I didn't understand. I didn't step back. I couldn't. His eyes, storm, lightning, something inhuman, held mine, and the cabin seemed too small for the two of us. His fingers brushed the air between us, not touching, but close enough that my breath caught. Then he pulled away, as if burned. The door opened behind him. The crew gathered in the corridor, faces pale and tight with fear. Their whispers sliced like cold wind. "She'll sink us. She's marked. She touched him. She's cursed now too." Kyle's gaze snapped toward them, cold enough to freeze the corridor. The whispers died instantly. He turned back to me, voice low enough that only I could hear. "You shouldn't have touched me," he murmured, something pained in the words, "because now the sea wants you too." Life aboard the drowned fleet settled into a rhythm made of salt and silence. Quiet breaths, creaking timbers, and the steady drag of fear that clung to every man aboard. The ship moved like a living thing, its old bones groaning with each swell, lanterns swaying with the sea's uneven breath. Crewmen drifted around me like ghosts, always watching from the corners of their eyes before looking away too quickly, as if staring too long might awaken whatever curse they believed had hitchhiked onto the ship with me. I didn't belong here, not among them, not among storms, not at the edge of myths made flesh. But the sea had taken me, and the sea did not return what it claimed. Captain Cale Rathmore kept his distance in a way that wasn't distance at all. I felt him everywhere. Days passed with him speaking little, his footsteps echoing down corridors I learned not to follow, his presence brushing against me like static each time he passed above deck. Yet even when he stood with his back to me, I could feel when his gaze found me, measuring, watching, holding something back with a restraint that felt like pressure against my ribs. He avoided me, but he didn't pretend I wasn't there. That somehow was worse. I tried to make myself small, as I always had. I scrubbed rails, carried water buckets, mended cloth with numb fingers. The crew tolerated my work, but not my presence. She touched him, marked. The sea watches her. Some spat at the planks when I walked by. Others avoided passing close enough for our sleeves to brush. Fear gathered around me like a second fog, thicker by the day. And then the storm came. Black clouds swallowed the horizon, rolling toward us with a growl. The wind rose in one violent breath, whipping through sails hard enough to make the ropes scream. The sea surged, lifting the ship and slamming it back down with a force that jolted through my bones. Crewmen scrambled, ropes snapping, orders shouted into the roar. My hands clung to the rail, knuckles white, heart pounding against the cage of my ribs. The ocean had always terrified me. It hunted in my nightmares, whispered in my dreams. Now it rose to claim me, and everyone aboard, with open jaws. At the helm, Kyle stood solid against the chaos, coat snapping like a banner, hair torn by the wind. His voice cut through the storm, sharp and commanding, a force of will that should not have been enough to hold back the sea. But for a moment, it did. Then the ship lurched. A wave slammed against the hull. Water surged across the deck, pulling at my feet. I braced for the plunge, the cold swallow of drowning. But the moment my palm pressed harder against the rail, the world shifted. The wind faltered. The waves eased. Clouds thinned as though torn open from within. Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. The crew stared. Dozens of wide, salt-burned eyes locked onto me, as if I were the calm eye of a storm that had been moments from devouring us all. My hand trembled against the rail. I had done nothing. I had only held on. But the sea had listened. She calmed it. The sea bends to her. Which? Their whispers were sharper now, laced with terror. Across the deck, Cale's gaze met mine. A storm still lived in his eyes, though the sea beneath us lay smooth as glass. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence pressed into me harder than the storm ever had. Later, below deck, the world grew smaller. I had barely stepped into the lantern-lit corridor when a broad-shouldered crewman cut off my path. Scars jagged across his jaw, his expression carved from anger and something uglier. "You think you're special," he hissed. His breath smelled of salt and bitterness. "Think the sea favors you?" I didn't. He slammed his hand beside my head, the wood cracking with the force. I flinched, breath catching. "You're a curse," he growled. "You'll sink us. People like you always do." His voice dropped, poisoned by jealousy. "And stay away from him. The captain isn't yours." The words hit harder than his hand, not because I wanted Cale, but because part of me feared I already belonged to something I didn't understand. My pulse pounded. I forced myself not to shrink, though my knees trembled. Then the air shifted. The lantern flames stilled. The timbers groaned as if bracing. The crewman's breath hitched. Cale filled the corridor like a storm breaking open. He didn't shout. He didn't move quickly. He simply appeared. And the space bowed around him, every shadow leaning back. His eyes went to the crewman first, cold, sharp, lethal, and then to me. I felt the weight of his gaze like a hand against my spine, steadying, claiming, furious. The crewman stiffened, fear replacing anger, but he didn't step back. Not until Cale took a single step forward. The corridor held its breath. Cale's voice came low, controlled, and dangerous enough to freeze the blood in my veins. She is not to be touched. The timbers shivered. The crewmen did too. And I realized the sea wasn't the only thing on the ship that could kill a man. The mark began to burn at dusk. Not gently, not like a warning, but like a brand pressed against living flesh. I stood alone on the deck, the horizon a thin wound of red bleeding into the sea. The last light clung to the waves before sinking, the air heavy with salt and waiting silence. Then, without breath, without reason, the lines beneath my skin ignited. A pulse, another, each beat in perfect rhythm with my heart. Heat lanced up my arm, sharp as lightning, cold as the deepest tide. I gasped and clutched my sleeve, but the glow seethed through the fabric, illuminating every trembling finger. The crew saw. Their whispers rose immediately, sharp enough to cut. Siren. She carries the sea's curse. Drowned marked. One spat over the rail. Another muttered a prayer meant to ward off drowning. Fear rolled across the deck in a wave heavier than any storm. And their eyes, wide, frantic, pressed against me like claws. I wanted to tell them they were wrong. That I was nothing more than Rebecca Tidewell. Overlooked, unwanted, forgettable. But the mark pulsed brighter, brighter still. At the helm, Cale stood rigid, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, gaze fixed on the dying horizon. He didn't look at me, not at first, but the tension in him sharpened the air. His silence was a storm held back by the thinnest restraint. When the crew's whispers grew too loud, when fear threatened to tip into violence, Cale moved. His boots struck the deck with deliberate weight. Each step was a refusal, a choice, a pulling of gravity toward me he couldn't seem to stop. He stopped, only a breath away. Lantern light caught the storm in his eyes, the shadow of something he fought to control. "Enough," he said, low, commanding, dangerous. The crew recoiled. Their fear didn't vanish, but they scattered, leaving the deck heavy with muttered curses and the lingering sting of their stares. My arm trembled against me. The mark pulsed, steady as a second heartbeat. Kyle watched, unblinking, the storm in him tightening like a coiled rope. But he said nothing more. Later, below deck, I found him waiting. The cabin hummed with runes carved into the walls, their glow faint but alive, responding to my presence in a way they hadn't before. Cale stood near the table, hands braced against its edge, shoulders taut with tension he no longer tried to hide. He didn't turn when I entered, but I felt the shift in him, the quiet, charged awareness that always filled a room between us. My breath shook. What is happening to me? Silence stretched like a blade. The ship creaked, distant waves hissed. Kyle didn't move until he had to, and when he spoke, the words were weighted with reluctance. "The mark is not dormant anymore," he said quietly. "It reacts to the sea, to me." Fear curled tight inside my ribs. The crew thinks I'm a siren. His jaw clenched. He turned then, slowly, meeting my eyes with storm-colored certainty. "You are not a siren." The conviction in his voice steadied something small inside me. But beneath it was something else. Uncertainty, fear, a truth he wasn't ready to name. My steps brought me closer without thinking. The lantern light brushed against his face, softening the scars, sharpening the shadows. "Then what am I?" I whispered. He didn't answer. His gaze flicked to my arm, where the glow pulsed through cloth like light underwater. His hand twitched just once, as if he meant to reach for me, but he curled his fingers against the table instead, fighting the impulse. That restraint was its own storm. "I fear," he whispered finally, so quiet I barely caught it, "what you are becoming." The confession hung between us like a breaking wave. My throat tightened. I wanted to insist I was still myself, still the overlooked girl the sea shouldn't bother with. But the mark pulsed harder, brighter, betraying every lie. Cale took a step toward me despite himself. The air thickened. His presence wrapped around my breath. He stopped close enough that I felt his warmth through the cold of the ship, close enough that his breath brushed my cheek. Salt and storm tangled together. His hand rose, shaking faintly, hovering inches from mine, not touching, not daring, not able to stay away. The ship groaned under the weight of something ancient. The runes along the walls flared, responding to the mark's glow. Whispers, layered and old, brushed against my bones like fingers trailing through the dark. Cale's voice broke the charged silence. "You should never have touched me," he muttered, restraint fraying at the edges. "The bond, it should not exist." My heart hammered. But it does. A crack of emotion flickered in his eyes. Fear, anger, something deeper. And the mark blazed in answer, heat searing through my skin. Light crawled across my arm in branching lines, racing faster with each pounding heartbeat. I gasped, clutching the burning mark. The whispers rose, every voice older than the sea itself, curling around us like smoke. Kyle stared at my glowing skin, breath sharp, and whispered, "Gods help us. She is awakening." The storm struck like a beast unchained. Wind tore through the rigging with a howl, sharp enough to split bone. Sails snapped like wounded wings, flapping violently before the sea ripped them into ribbons. Waves towered above the masts, crashing down with a force that shook the ship to its spine. Lanterns swung wildly, flames sputtering, shadows thrashing across the deck like frantic, drowning hands. The crew shouted, but every voice drowned beneath the roar. I clung to the rail, fingers slipping on seawater, breath breaking against the wall of wind. Salt stung my eyes. Fear pressed into my ribs like a tightening fist. The ocean had always terrified me, but tonight it felt hungry, intent, as if it had risen from its depths for me alone. Beneath my sleeve, the mark throbbed, a pulse, a burn, a living rhythm that matched the storm blow for blow. At the helm, Cale stood unyielding against the tempest, coat whipping like torn banners behind him. His storm-colored eyes locked on the horizon, unblinking even as the world broke open around him. He shouted commands, voice cutting through thunder, his presence the only anchor on a ship that bucked like a trapped creature. But even he could not hold back the sea forever. A wave slammed into the side of the ship. The deck lurched, my feet slid, and I nearly lost my grip. "Below!" Kyle's voice thundered across the chaos. His gaze snapped to mine through the sheets of rain, sharp, unrelenting. "Now!" I tried to move. The wind clawed at my coat. The sea grabbed at my legs, dragging me dangerously close to the edge. My breath hitched, terror choking the air from my lungs. Kyle's hand seized my arm, hot, steady, certain. The mark erupted in heat beneath his grip, flaring like fire. But he didn't release me. He pulled me through the storm, body shielding mine with fierce, reckless determination. He didn't stop until we stumbled through the cabin door, and the world snapped into silence. The door slammed shut behind us, muting the storm to a distant roar. The small space flickered with lantern light, shadows trembling on the damp walls carved with ancient runes. The air felt thick, salt, storm, fear, and something hotter. I braced my hands against the table to steady myself. My breath came too fast, shallow and trembling. Cale stood close, too close. His coat dripped seawater, rivulets trailing down the sharp planes of his face. His hair clung to his jaw, dark and disheveled from the storm. His eyes, those impossible storm-colored eyes, locked onto mine with a force that stole breath from my chest. He tried to hold distance, posture rigid with restraint. But the cabin was too small, the world outside too violent, the pull between us too strong. Our breaths mingled in the space between us, warm against cold. "You should not be here," he said, voice low, rough. "I didn't choose this," I whispered. "The sea." His jaw clenched. He took a step closer despite himself. His hand braced against the wall beside my head, caging me in. His breath brushed my cheek, salt and storm, sending a shiver down my spine. The mark beneath my sleeve pulsed with heat, and the runes on the cabin walls flared in answer, glowing faintly in the lantern light. The air tightened. My heartbeat stumbled, then raced. My hands trembled where they pressed against the table. The closeness was suffocating and intoxicating all at once, fear and longing tangling together, until I couldn't breathe without feeling him. His gaze flicked to my lips, then back to my eyes. Slow, reluctant, devastating. He leaned in, just enough that the heat of him grazed my skin, just enough that his breath trembled against my mouth. His hand hovered close to mine, fingers twitching with a restraint that felt like pain. My body answered. My breath hitched. Something deep inside me lurched forward, instinct demanding I close the space he refused to cross. For a heartbeat, I thought he would kiss me. The storm outside raged. The runes pulsed. The mark burned. The world narrowed to the inches between us, to the sound of his uneven breath, to the trembling tension that felt older than the tide. Then, Cale pulled back, his eyes squeezed shut. His jaw tightened hard enough to crack the bone. His hand withdrew from the wall as if burned. The distance he forced between us hurt, sharp, cold, immediate. My chest ached. My breath shivered out in a broken exhale. Silence filled the cabin, thick as seawater. The storm slammed against the hull, lanterns swayed, and still neither of us moved. Cale opened his eyes. His voice came low and dangerous, every word edged with something he fought desperately to contain. "If I touch you again," he breathed, "I will never let you go." The storm outside crashed, but it was nothing compared to the one inside me. The mark wouldn't let me sleep. It pulsed beneath my skin like a second heartbeat, glowing faintly in the dim cabin, just enough to cast soft, shivering light across the walls. Shadows stretched long with each sway of the lantern above me, groaning timbers echoing the rhythm of the sea. Every breath felt too heavy, every silence filled with whispers I couldn't quite decipher. The sea was inside me now, and it refused to be quiet. I felt Cale's presence before the door even opened. The air tightened, thickened, storm-scented and restless. When he stepped inside, lantern light caught in his storm-colored eyes, glinting on the droplets clinging to his coat. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if torn between stepping forward or fleeing the truth gathering between us. "You cannot ignore it," he said quietly. His voice was low, rough, almost pained. I pushed myself upright, clutching my arm. The mark flared in response, lines of light pulsing through my sleeve. "What is it?" My voice trembled before I could steady it. "What am I?" Cale shut the door behind him. The click echoed sharply, too loud, too final. He leaned against the wood as though bracing himself against a storm only he understood. His gaze locked onto mine, heavy and unyielding. "You," he said, breath tight, "are the last marked heir of the siren lineage." The world dropped out from under me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's impossible. Sirens are myths, stories. They're gone." "They are not gone," Cale replied, voice coiled with conviction. "They are drowned, bound, their bloodlines scattered across kingdoms until it faded into silence. But the mark does not lie. It chose you." Fear twisted in my chest. "I'm no heir. I'm not anything. I've always been nothing." Something in his expression cracked, barely. A softness that didn't fit the curse he carried. "You are not nothing," he said. "The sea has followed you all your life. Whether you knew it or not, it claimed you long before this night." The cabin seemed smaller, the air thicker. The lantern flickered as though the truth itself disturbed the flame. My throat tightened. "Why me?" Kyle hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it would bind something neither of us were ready to face. Finally, he stepped forward. "Because," he said quietly, "you are the only one left. And because you touched me." The mark blazed brighter, heat searing through my sleeve. I gasped, clutching my arm. "What does that mean?" I whispered. His jaw tightened. Anger, restraint, fear, all carved into the motion. "It means the bond is real," he said. "It means the sea has bound us to each other." My heart stumbled, caught between terror and the slow, aching pull he always seemed to draw from me. "Then why do you fear it?" Kyle turned away, bracing both hands against the table, as though the weight of his confession might break him. "Because I am cursed," he said, "bound to the drowned fleet. I cannot die. I cannot rest. I cannot leave the sea that claimed me." His voice cracked, quietly, but enough to scrape something raw inside me. "Every soul I touch is taken," he whispered. "Every bond I form is drowned. I have watched faces vanish into the tide. I carry every one of their screams inside me. I will not, cannot, let it happen to you." The vulnerability in those words hit harder than the storm outside. My chest ached with the weight of it. "You fear claiming me," I whispered, "because you think the sea will steal me." His head lifted. His gaze met mine. Storm, silence, and something wounded. "It will," he said. "It always does." The mark pulsed again, bright, burning, spreading heat up my arm. The runes carved into the walls responded, faint lines of light trembling awake. The air hummed, thick with something ancient, something restless. "You don't understand," Kyle said, voice fraying. "The bond is not simple want. It is inevitability. If I claim you, the sea will make you mine. Forever. You will never be free." My breath caught. Fear and longing tangled in my ribs. "But I'm already bound." Cale's entire body stilled. The ship creaked. The storm hissed against the hull. The mark pulsed brighter. I stepped closer, despite every warning in his voice, my fingers trembling. You fear losing me, I whispered. But I've been lost all my life, forgotten, unwanted. If the sea wants me, maybe it's the only thing that ever has. Kale's restraint broke. He turned sharply, closing the space between us in 2 steps. His breath brushed my cheek, salt and storm, sending a shiver down my spine. His hand lifted, trembling as it hovered just inches from mine. I shouldn't, he whispered, voice raw. I cannot. But you want to, I breathed. His silence was a confession. His eyes flicked to my lips, then back to mine, storm and desire and fear swirling together. The mark answered, blazing hot under my skin. The runes flared, whispers rose, ancient, layered, brushing against bone. I gasped, clutching my arm as pain surged through me. Kale's voice broke the air, low and heavy with inevitability. You were never meant to fear the sea, he whispered. You were meant to rule it. The storm hadn't passed. It only held its breath. The sea lay momentarily calm, too calm, its stillness heavy as a held scream. Lanterns flickered across the deck, their trembling light pooling over salt-stained wood. The crew kept their distance, whispering in tight clusters, fear clinging to them like damp clothes. Their glances darted toward me, sharp with superstition. But it wasn't their eyes I felt. It was his. Kale stood at the helm, posture rigid, storm-colored eyes fixed on the horizon, as though watching something only he could see. He had avoided me for days, speaking in clipped necessities, slipping away before silence could turn intimate, never allowing proximity that might crack the restraint he clung to like a lifeline. But tonight, the air was thick with inevitability, and the silence hurt. I found him below deck, in the captain's cabin, the warm glow of a lantern, swaying over runes carved into the walls, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the mark beneath my sleeve. He looked up when I entered. His jaw tightened. Shadows carved themselves around his eyes. You should not be here, he said, voice low, roughened by something more dangerous than anger. I have nowhere else to be, I whispered. My hands trembled. The mark burned beneath my sleeve, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Steady, insistent, undeniable. Silence pressed thickly between us. He held it as long as he could, then stepped toward me. One slow step, then another. His presence filled the narrow cabin, brushing against my breath before his body ever did. His hand hovered close to mine, trembling with restraint he no longer could hide. I cannot claim you, he said, voice fraying. If I do, the sea will bind you to me. You will never be free. My chest tightened, breath catching. But I am already bound. His gaze snapped to mine. Storm, hunger, denial, breaking apart one grain at a time. A tremor shuddered through his hand. Inches separated us. Only inches. And I felt them like claws. The lantern flickered. Shadows stretched long across the walls. The runes pulsed in answer to the mark burning under my skin. Whispers, ancient, layered, slid through the air, brushing bone. Pain lanced up my arm. I gasped, clutching the mark. Kyle's jaw tightened. His restraint broke, just slightly, enough for him to lift a hand toward me. His fingers hovered near my cheek, shaking violently, as if the act cost him more than any curse carved into his skin. I should not, he breathed. But you want to, I whispered. His silence was a confession more intimate than a touch. His fingers brushed my cheek, barely. Yet the air split open. The mark flared, heat twisting through my veins. My breath caught. The world narrowed to that impossibly gentle contact. The runes along the walls flared, bright as lightning under deep water. The whispers grew louder, voices older than the tide circling us, binding us in stillness. Kyle's breath trembled. His chest rose shallowly as he fought a losing battle. "I cannot protect you from this," he said, voice breaking in the middle. "If I claim you, the sea will never let you go." My heart ached with the rawness of it. "Then don't protect me," I whispered. "Promise me instead." His eyes softened, stormlight dimming, sorrow settling. "Promise you what?" "That you won't let me drown alone." The ship creaked. The sea hissed against the hull. Silence wrapped around us, thick as tide water. His hand cupped my cheek fully now, trembling hard enough that I felt it through my bones. Finally, he whispered, low, raw, carved from pain and inevitability. "I promise." The words bound deeper than any chain, stronger than any curse. He leaned closer, slow as the tide, until his forehead brushed mine. Our breaths mingled, salt and storm, too close, too warm, too dangerous. The last of his restraint cracked. "You are mine," Cale whispered. The mark ignited, searing bright, burning in violent rhythm with my heart. The runes answered with blinding stormlight. The whispers rose, louder, older, as though calling something into being. My breath broke in my throat. The world pulsed with heat and inevitability. Cale's lips hovered a breath from mine. So close I felt the trembling heat of them. His eyes locked onto mine, storm-colored and unyielding, filled with hunger and fear and a devotion he had never meant to offer anyone. His breath brushed my skin, closer, closer, almost. "I will not let you go," he whispered. The storm outside roared, waves slamming against the hull with violent fury. The lantern flickered wildly. The ship groaned in protest. Inside, only our breathing filled the space. Shallow, uneven, trembling. The ocean thundered, and something inside me answered. His. The sea was quiet that night, but it wasn't calm. Its silence felt aware, like the breath held by something old enough to swallow kingdoms. Waves lapped against the hull in a rhythm that wasn't their own, each pulse slow, deliberate, listening. Lanterns burned low across the deck, their trembling flames casting thin trails of gold over salt-stained wood. The crew moved like ghosts, soft-footed and tense, whispering prayers and curses under their breath. Their fear no longer bothered to hide itself. It clung to the air, thick and metallic. But beneath their superstition, beneath the murmurs and sidelong glances, a deeper pull stirred. Choice, unavoidable, ancient. The mark pulsed beneath my sleeve, glowing faintly in time with my heartbeat. Each flare tightened something in my chest, drawing me closer to the truth I had tried so long to outrun. The sea had claimed me long before this night, and the bond between Kyle and me was not a question anymore. It lived under my skin. He stood at the helm, posture rigid, storm-colored eyes locked on the horizon. He hadn't touched me since that night in the cabin. He barely spoke. His restraint was a blade he held against his own throat, sharp, merciless, fraying at the edges. But I felt him watch me, always. I stepped onto the deck. Wind brushed my face, carrying salt that stung my lips. The mark brightened beneath my sleeve. Runes carved into the ship's bones glowed in answer. The crew froze, fear carving hard lines across their faces. Cale turned, his eyes locked on mine, storm and silence, unyielding. Something ancient shifted in the air between us. He stepped toward me. You should not choose this, he said, voice low, raw. If you do, the sea will bind you to me. You will never be free. My breath trembled, but my voice did not falter. I have never been free, I whispered. Not from abandonment, not from insignificance, not from fear. My throat tightened. But with you, I am seen. His jaw clenched, restraint cracking. His hand lifted, trembling, hovering near mine, not touching, yet burning like a closeness I had carried for days. I am cursed, he said, the words scraping out of him. Bound to the drowned fleet, I cannot die, cannot rest. Every soul I touch is claimed. Every bond I form is drowned. I cannot, will not, let the sea take you. His vulnerability broke something inside me. Then let it happen, I whispered. But let it take me with you. Silence struck the deck, heavy, stunned. You do not understand what you are asking, he whispered. I do, I answered. I ask for the bond, not as captive, not as curse, as equal. His eyes softened, subtly, painfully. Equal, he repeated, as if the word itself pulled him apart. Yes, I breathed, equal. The mark blazed in answer, hot, searing. The runes along the deck burst into faint light. Whispers rose, ancient, layered, tides given voice. Pain lanced up my arm. I gasped, clutching it. Cale's restraint shattered. He stepped closer, framing my face with a trembling hand. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, a feather-light touch that held the weight of centuries. His breath shook against mine. If I vow this, he whispered, I vow it forever. The sea will never let me break it. Then vow it, I said, beside me. For a long, fragile heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, I vow it, he breathed, voice raw, not as captor, not as curse. His thumb stroked my cheek, reverent and trembling, as equal, as yours. The mark erupted in light. Runes flared. Whispers rose. The air thickened with stormlight. The crew froze, terror warping their faces. She claims him, someone whispered. The sea binds them, another answered. We are doomed. Cale turned toward them, shoulders squared, presence dark and commanding. You are not doomed, he said, voice cutting through their panic. You are bound, bound to her, bound to me, bound to the sea. Silence fell, trembling at the edges. The crew retreated, whispering and shaken. Only then did I realize I was trembling too. Later, below deck, the cabin glowed with soft lantern light. Runes along the walls pulsed faintly, responding to every breath I took. Cale stood near the table, hands braced against the wood, shoulders tense as though holding back a tide inside him. He didn't turn when I entered, but I felt the shift in him, relief, fear, something raw enough to hurt. I have carried this curse alone for centuries, he said, voice low, roughened by truth. I have watched faces fade into the tide, heard their screams drown into silence. I never let myself hope for anything. Until you. My chest tightened. I chose it, I whispered. I chose you. He turned then. His eyes, storm-colored, unyielding, locked onto mine with a clarity that stole my breath. Then I vow it again, he whispered, not as curse, not as captor. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The air thickened, as equal, as yours. The mark seared with light, burning, claiming. The runes flared, the whispers rose in a chorus of ancient approval. Cale closed the final inches between us, his breath brushing mine, salt and storm, hunger and fear. We face the sea together, he whispered. Yes, I breathed, together. Outside, the storm roared back to life, waves slamming against the hull, lanterns trembling in their hooks. Inside, only our breathing filled the cabin, shallow, uneven, impossibly intertwined. The sea had taken everything from me once, but now it gave me him, and the ocean itself seemed to bow. Thank you for listening. If this story found a place in you, come back when your heart wants another. With love, Claire